I remember vividly the first time I heard the name Mothman. It was a sweltering summer evening in my hometown of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The air thick with humidity and the sky veiled in deep purple shadows. I was a teenager back then, chasing after thrills in a place where the extraordinary was often cloaked in legend. But as the cicadas sang their haunting summer song, an unnerving tale began to unfold. A tale that would haunt me for years to come. It started with a local legend, an ominous tale whispered among friends around campfires, warning of a creature with fiery red eyes and a wingspan that could eclipse the moon. The Mothman was a specter of fear, lurking in the dense woods that bordered our town. Most dismissed it as nonsense, the product of overactive imaginations and too many late-night horror movies. But for me, the thrill of the unknown was irresistible. One sticky July night, my friends and I decided to venture into the heart of the legend itself. We planned a trip to the old TNT area, a deserted munitions site from World War II that lay abandoned just outside of town. It was said to be the Mothman's domain, where it emerged from the shadows to terrorize those foolish enough to tread upon its territory. Armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility only the young possess, we set off into the wilderness. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape as we navigated the overgrown path leading to the decaying factory buildings. The air was eerily still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under our feet. I felt a shiver of anticipation tingling down my spine. As we approached the ruins, a strange silence enveloped us, as if the world were holding its breath. The first sign of something amiss was the rustling in the trees. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks, but the stillness of the air made it impossible. My friend Mike nudged me with a nervous grin. "Hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the thumping of my heart. I nodded, straining to catch another sound. Then it happened again, a low, throaty hum that seemed to reverberate through the air. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, like the distant whir of machinery, blended with the cries of a distant animal. Our laughter faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. As we stood frozen in place, the noise grew louder, closer, until it was deafening. The air vibrated with tension, and a sudden chill crept up my arms. Then out of the darkness, it emerged, a massive figure, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its eyes glowed like fiery coals, piercing through the shadows with an intensity that left us paralyzed with fear. The Mothman was real. We stood there transfixed as the creature unfurled its enormous wings, sending a rush of air that nearly knocked us off our feet. It hovered above us, an ethereal presence that seemed to defy logic. I could barely breathe as it fixed its gaze upon us, its eyes holding secrets I couldn't begin to comprehend. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the Mothman took flight, vanishing into the night with a grace that belied its monstrous form. We stood in the stunned silence, the reality of what we'd seen slowly sinking in. The stories were true. Something dark and unexplainable lurked in the shadows of Point Pleasant. From that moment on, the Mothman consumed my thoughts. I became obsessed with unraveling the mystery, digging through dusty archives and interviewing anyone who had encountered the creature. The more I learned, the deeper the enigma became. Witnesses spoke of premonitions and warnings, of tragedies that seemed intertwined with the creature's appearances. The Mothman was no mere urban legend. It was a harbinger of doom. My research led me to John Keel, a journalist who had chronicled the events of the 1960s when the Mothman first made its presence known. His writings were filled with accounts of bizarre sightings and inexplicable phenomena, painting a chilling picture of a town on the brink of disaster. But it was his theory that the Mothman was an omen, a sign of impending catastrophe, that resonated with me the most. The deeper I delved, the more I realized that the Mothman was not just a creature. It was a manifestation of our darkest fears, a mirror reflecting the anxieties that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. It was as if Point Pleasant itself was a nexus of supernatural forces, drawing in the curious and the terrified alike. As summer turned to fall, the air grew colder and the days shortened. The Mothman's shadow loomed larger, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I could feel its eyes watching me, a silent guardian of secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to uncover. My dreams were plagued by visions of wings and eyes, of whispered warnings carried on the wind. Then, one fateful night, everything changed. I received a call from a local historian, an eccentric man named Harold Warden, who claimed to have discovered something that would unravel the mystery of the Mothman once and for all. He insisted that we meet at the old library after dark, away from prying eyes. His voice trembled with urgency, and I knew I couldn't ignore his plea. That evening, I arrived at the library just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The building was shrouded in shadows, its stone facade casting long, dark fingers across the ground. As I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, a musty scent enveloped me, mingling with the dust of forgotten tomes. Harold awaited me in the dimly lit study, surrounded by stacks of books and yellow documents. His eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and dread, and he gestured for me to sit. "I've found something," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Something that could change everything we know about the Mothman." He handed me a faded journal, its pages brittle with age. As I flipped through it, I realized it was the diary of a long-deceased townsperson who had witnessed the Mothman's appearances in the past. The entries were filled with cryptic symbols and descriptions of strange rituals performed in the woods, a dark history that had been hidden from view. But it was the final entry that chilled me to the bone. It spoke of a prophecy, a dire warning etched in ink long before the Mothman ever graced our skies. A prophecy that foretold of an impending disaster, a cataclysm that would be heralded by the creature's return. The words swirled in my mind, each syllable heavy with foreboding. I could feel the weight of history pressing down upon me, a reminder that some secrets were best left undisturbed. But curiosity was a relentless force, urging me to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As I sat in the dimly lit library, the world outside seemed to fade away. The journal's words wrapped around me like tendrils of darkness, whispering secrets only the brave dared to hear. The Mothman was not just a creature of myth. It was a warning, a harbinger of the storm that was about to break. A sense of unease settled in my gut, a gnawing suspicion that time was running out. The shadows deepened and the air grew heavy with anticipation. Harold's eyes bore into mine, reflecting a truth I was reluctant to accept. "We have to act," he urged, his voice a mixture of fear and determination. "The Mothman's return signifies something much larger, something that could destroy everything." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. The Mothman was more than a mystery to solve. It was a puzzle that demanded our attention. But as the clock ticked on, I realized that our time was limited, and the answers we sought were shrouded in uncertainty. As I left the library that night, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a promise of things to come. The Mothman's presence was palpable, an unseen force that watched from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The air crackled with tension, and I knew that the days ahead would be fraught with danger. The Mothman's prophecy hung over us like a storm cloud, threatening to unleash chaos upon the unsuspecting town of Point Pleasant. Yet in the face of uncertainty, one thing was clear. The Mothman's enigma was far from over. As I made my way back home, the weight of the journal's prophecy clung to me like a shadow. The streets were deserted, bathed in the silvery glow of the moon. But in that moment of solitude, I felt anything but alone. The Mothman's eyes were upon me, watching, waiting. And as I stepped into the safety of my house, a chilling thought crossed my mind. Perhaps the true horror was yet to come. For the Mothman was not just a creature. It was an omen of what lay beyond the veil of our understanding, a warning that could no longer be ignored. And as the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was about to break. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a journey into the unknown, a journey that would test the limits of fear and courage, and ultimately reveal the truth that lay hidden in the shadows. The Mothman's prophecy had been set into motion, and as the clock ticked toward midnight, the echoes of its wings reverberated through the night, promising that the enigma had only just begun. I didn't sleep at all that night. The shadows in my room seemed to twist and dance, fueled by the whispering wind outside. My mind was racing with images of the Mothman, its glowing red eyes penetrating my thoughts. The air was thick with an impending sense of doom that made my skin prickle with every creak of the house. Morning couldn't come fast enough, yet as dawn finally broke, a persistent unease clung to me. Driven by a restless curiosity and a growing dread, I found myself back at the library. Harold was already there, surrounded by a chaotic sea of papers and old newspaper clippings. His eyes were bloodshot, hinting that he too had spent the night tangled in the web of the Mothman's prophecy. "We don't have much time," he said urgently, pushing a stack of documents toward me. His hands trembled slightly. "I've been connecting the dots, following the Mothman's sightings throughout history. Each appearance coincides with a significant disaster." Harold's research pointed to a sinister pattern. There were accounts of the creature being seen just before the Silver Bridge collapse, which claimed 46 lives. Other reports linked the Mothman to tragedies in Europe and Asia: fires, earthquakes, and mysterious deaths that were never fully explained. "What does it want?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Why does it show up just before something terrible happens?" Harold looked at me, his expression grim. "It's as if it's trying to warn us, but we're too blind to see the signs until it's too late. Maybe it's drawn to human suffering. Or perhaps it's a guardian trying to prevent catastrophe, and we're simply misinterpreting its intentions." A chill ran down my spine. It was clear we needed to act quickly if we wanted to prevent whatever disaster was looming over Point Pleasant. The prophecy in the journal had foretold the Mothman's return as a harbinger of destruction. If the creature had appeared to us, it meant we were running out of time. "There's one place we haven't explored yet," Harold said, breaking the tense silence. "The old church in the woods. Local legends say it's a gateway, a place where the fabric between our world and the supernatural is at its weakest." The idea seemed preposterous, but desperation made it plausible. We decided to go that very night, hoping to find some connection or revelation that could help us decipher the Mothman's cryptic warnings. With flashlights in hand and fear as our companion, Harold and I set out for the church as dusk began to bleed into night. The path through the forest was eerily silent, our footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Every rustle in the trees sent my heart racing, each shadow stretching out to remind us of the creature that haunted our town. As we approached the church, its silhouette loomed like a specter, the air heavy with a palpable tension. We pushed open the rotting door, the creak echoing through the empty nave like a mournful wail. Inside, the darkness was oppressive, and the faint glow of our flashlights only added to the unsettling atmosphere. I could feel a presence, something ancient and otherworldly lurking just beyond the reach of light. It was then that I noticed the symbols carved into the walls, similar to those in the journal. Strange, archaic runes that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. I traced a finger over them, feeling a sudden rush of cold that seeped into my bones. Harold stood beside me, his face a mask of determination. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the thundering of my heart. "This is where it all connects." As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the church, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into total darkness. Panic seized me, but before I could react, an intense feeling of dread washed over us. The air hummed with electricity, and I knew the Mothman was near. The creature's eyes blazed like twin infernos in the shadows, and for a moment, time stood still. An overwhelming sense of foreboding enveloped us, as if we were on the cusp of something terrible and unavoidable. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the abyss, Harold spoke words I couldn't comprehend. An incantation, a plea, a warning. It was as if he had tapped into some forgotten power, trying to communicate with the enigmatic force that loomed before us. In that instant, the Mothman unfurled its wings, casting a shadow that swallowed the darkness whole. It was a moment of revelation, a fleeting glimpse of understanding that left me breathless. The creature was not an enemy, but a guide. Its presence was not meant to instill fear, but to awaken us to the truth. The tension broke like a wave, and the Mothman took flight, its wings cutting through the night as it soared toward the horizon. Harold and I stood in stunned silence, the weight of what we had witnessed settling over us like a heavy fog. I realized then that the true horror was not the Mothman itself, but the ignorance that blinded us to its purpose. We had been given a second chance, a chance to heed the warning and prevent the disaster that loomed on the horizon. As the first light of dawn pierced the sky, I knew our journey was far from over. The Mothman's prophecy had been set into motion, and it was up to us to decipher its message before time ran out. We had been chosen to bear witness to the enigma, to unravel the truth that lay hidden in the shadows. And as we made our way back to town, I felt a renewed sense of determination. The Mothman had left its mark on our souls, a reminder that the world was filled with mysteries beyond our understanding. We were no longer mere spectators in the dance of fate. We were participants, charged with protecting the future from the chaos that lurked on the edges of reality. The storm had not yet broken, but with the Mothman as our guide, I knew we would face whatever came our way with courage and conviction. The enigma had only just begun, and I was ready to confront the darkness head-on. For in the end, it was not fear that defined us, but the strength to stand against it.